Hello and welcome to class. This is American Federal Government. I'm Ken Hicks. We've been talking about the role that the federal bureaucracy plays in American government. It's important to keep in mind that each state also has fairly extensive civil service. I mentioned the idea that the bureaucracy is kind of like the muscles of government. They also kind of illustrate, again, the principal agent problem. And that is, again, the sense in which, Congress authorizes, agencies to act. Presidents give them, give them orders in terms of how to execute their job. But at the same time, there is always a certain amount of administrative discretion available to them. And it's this fact that, and again, when you look at most people's preconceptions of what a bureaucrat is, you would think of someone sitting behind a desk moving paper around. A lot of civil servants are scientists, they're social scientists, they're economists, they're physical scientists. They study things like the tracking of disease and stuff like that. And in other words, they are effectively experts. And that sense of expertise oftentimes, leads people to a certain amount of mistrust. Because they can basically say, I know things that you don't know about an issue that may lead me to a different conclusion than you. So what are we learning today? First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the composition of the federal civil service, who are the bureaucrats. And then fourth, we're going to talk about managing the bureaucracy, how the different political branches of government and how the judiciary affect the behavior of the civil service. And then finally, we'll conclude with some questions about, what we think about bureaucracy and its role in American government. So first and foremost, who are the bureaucrats? Okay, we want you to, it's important to keep in mind that to become a federal, worker, you have to go through a civil service hiring process. You may be, if you're fortunate, be a political appointee. And also, if you have a business, you might find yourself contracting with the federal government. So again, who are Americans? When you look at this graph, it shows it in kind of three different dimensions. One is gender and race. The other is education. And then military service. When you look at the country as a whole, women comprise 51% of the country. They are 43% of the federal bureaucracy in terms of race, ethnicity, and things like that. The U.S. population is 59% white, 14% black, 19% Latino, 6% Asian. The executive branch is 58% white, so whites are slightly underrepresented. 20% of blacks, which means that blacks are slightly overrepresented, and 7% are Asians. Only 11% are Hispanics, which means that Hispanics are underrepresented. One of the implications of Donald Trump's kind of first year in federal office is he's laid off a bunch of federal workers, and in fact that has disproportionately hit black women. They are overrepresented. They are, I think, roughly 6% of the federal workforce. And right now in the District of Columbia, unemployment is running at in excess of 6%. So, I mean, again, that's a significant implication there. In terms of education, 11% of the United States has less than a high school education. 27% have at least a high school degree. 29% have some college. A fifth of the country has a college degree. 13% have postdoctorate degrees. When you look at executive branch agencies, it shouldn't be surprising that very few have no, little to no education. Mostly those are kind of the janitorial staffs that work on federal contracts. 24% only have a high school degree. 19% only have a high school or some college. But 28% have a college degree, and 28% have some kind of postdoctorate education. again, that tells you something, that the federal workforce is generally highly educated. In terms of military service, the U.S. population, 93% of Americans have not served. Only 7% of Americans have. In terms of the federal civil service, and this again is reflected in the layoffs that Donald Trump has instituted, almost a third of federal civil servants are veterans. And so when you're laying off large swaths of the federal workforce, you're hitting, veterans alongside that. Now, when you look again at where federal workers are located, most people think that they all live and work in Washington, D.C. Only about 440,000 Americans that work in the federal civil service live and work in the District of Columbia. 1.4 million live and work within the states, which again, kind of highlights the extent to which again, the Postal Service is highly represented, but there are other kind of federal agencies that live, that are distributed throughout the United States. So historically, bureaucratic agencies were populated by partisans, okay, and that was what was known as the spoils system. It was from a guy in the early 20th century, who basically applied that kind of dictum to the victor belong the spoils. And so the idea was that when you won control of government, you got to fill these kind of civil service posts. And in the early 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century, the federal government was pretty small. And so you could get away with that. But when you have loyalty being your primary guide, there are lots of things the government does where loyalty is less important than it is a technical skill. And as we got into the middle of the 20th century, and as the size of the federal government, especially when you think about the Civil War, you saw, it wasn't just that the Department of War and the Department of Navy dramatically expanded. You also saw the creation of the Department of Agriculture, which was a Civil War expedient to make farming and to make the production of food and also the identification of cattle and horses, because again, cavalry was an enormous factor in the Civil War, and you had to have horses to do that. And the Department of Agriculture was created for that purpose. And so the point is that over the course of the 19th century, the spoils system increasingly became unworkable. Abraham Lincoln, in the midst of a war, trying to manage a war, found himself continually dealing with requests, for patronage positions, and he wrote letters complaining about how much of his time was taken up with, getting people jobs. And so one of the big reforms during the Progressive Era was this idea that we need to get politics out of the implementation of public policy. This is what gives rise to the idea of the science of public administration. And it's important to keep in mind that the discipline of political science in the United States really emerges in the post-Civil War era as a good government reform movement. It was basically, and again, public administration is one of the major kind of subdisciplines within political science. And Woodrow Wilson, who was one of our early 20th century presidents, was the first political scientist to become president of the United States. And he was a practicing political scientist. He vaulted to political prominence from becoming president of Princeton, and ultimately became the mayor of New Jersey. But he wrote quite a bit about public administration and basically set the tone. He and another kind of contemporary of that era, Max Weber, a German political scientist and sociologist, emphasized the idea that you really don't want partisanship to become how the bureaucracy functions. Bureaucracies are supposed to be durable. You have to create institutional memory in order for bureaucracies to work. People have to know the systems in place, how paper gets moved from one department to the next, and how decisions are made. And so Woodrow Wilson was one of these first guys to make this argument that we need to have a wall of separation between this, a professional civil service whose job is to objectively analyze public policies and to figure out the best ways of implementing them from the rough and tumble world of politics. And so the progressive era, the reformers of that era saw education as the key to creating an impartial, apolitical civil service. And this is really where you begin to see universities offering degrees in political science and public administration. And again, the point is, you want to have a civil service that is immune to politics to some extent. And that's not what we're dealing with right now. That is really one of the real sicknesses in our politics, that all too often partisanship is bleeding into the implementation of public policy. And again, the idea is supposed to be you get education, you get training in how to be an objective implementer of public policies. And that means you don't really care if it's a Republican or a Democratic administration that you're getting an executive order from. You just care about ensuring that the policy that's put in place is implemented in the most efficient and effective way possible. But also, you have to have the expertise to be able to say, what you're asking me to do is illegal. And that's something that, again, is part and parcel of the sickness that we're dealing with in our politics. That there are people in our political system that care more about partisanship and more about partisan loyalty and more about doing whatever they think needs to be done, regardless of questions of legality, than in doing things the right way. So there is always this balance. Presidents want an executive branch that exhibits what Stanford political scientist named Terry Moe described as responsive competence. But government functions best when civil servants exhibit neutral competence. Okay? So government is most effective and efficient when bureaucratic agencies are independent and impartial. And presidents have historically placed political appointees with ties to the president or to the party at the head of most administrations. And I can tell you the real fights, the bureaucratic fights, began to intensify during the Reagan administration. But in a lot of instances, those Reagan, kind of partisans that came into the civil service, doing battle with the federal bureaucracy, at the end of their terms, they walked away and they said, I came to appreciate those folks. I understood now, as after I got in the job for a little while, that these guys were professional and that they were objective and that they just wanted to do their jobs. That's ancient history now, from the 1980s. That is no longer the world that we live in. So one of the things that drives a lot of our politics is the size of the federal government, and that has created at various points over the last half century or so lots of incentives for administrations to come into office saying that they want to downsize and or privatize many aspects of what's going on with the federal government. So how do you go about populating the bureaucracy? Again, I mentioned the spoils system, and that was, again, a system where, political loyalists were, political loyalty was the main criterion for getting a federal job. In 1883, as a result of the assassination of a U.S. president, Congress passed the Pendleton Reform Act, which replaced the spoils system with a merit-based system for staffing federal agencies. James Garfield was the president who was assassinated. He was actually assassinated by a guy named Charles Guiteau, who was Louisianan, a mentally unstable person, who believed that he had helped get Garfield, the victory in Louisiana. He met Garfield at a train platform, which again, it tells you what a different era it was, that a president could be walking around unattended in a public place. And he basically shot Garfield in the back, and because Garfield said, I don't have time for you, and claimed that by killing him, he had ensured that his faction of the Republican Party would end up governing. So there are a number of factors that in addition to the Pendleton Act, that again, the point of the Pendleton Act is to establish a merit system. You don't get a federal job because of who you know. You get a federal job because of your performance on, basically your resume, or your performance on civil service examinations. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 enhanced and created a Merit Systems Protection Board that basically increased the protections of federal civil servants from retaliation. A lot of the firings that the Trump administration have done in this last year or so have been challenged in court. They've fired Department of Justice prosecutors. They've fired FBI agents, and those guys have even more protections than most civil servants. And many of those folks have sued the federal government, and I expect many of those lawsuits are going to result in those folks getting very large settlements. You also have the creation of the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which administers collective bargaining for federal employees. There are a number, the Postal Service, the air traffic controllers, these are all public sector unions. The Federal Labor Relations Authority is responsible for negotiating the contract with those federal employees. They also adjudicate personnel grievances. And then finally, again, you have the Office of Personnel Management, which manages the recruitment, testing, and training of all federal officials. So if you decide you want to become a federal worker, you will probably find yourself going to the Office of Personnel Management website and filling out paperwork and maybe having to take some kind of test, go into a federal office in a town where there are OPM offices to take an exam. Over 1,000 of the 4,000 political appointees at the top of the federal agency require Senate confirmation. That's a lot of people. These are the folks that, again, presidents come into office and have to make upwards of 4,000 political appointees. Nobody has that many close friends. And so inevitably you have to rely on, party and people you set up an office to get people and call for resumes and things like that. Many political appointees have personal ties to the president or to the president's party. Presidents often use appointments to signal messages about their management style. For example, as the first black president, Barack Obama nominated 7 women and 10 people of color to serve in his first cabinet, while George W. Bush and Donald Trump selected people with business backgrounds. In his second term, Donald Trump has almost entirely populated his cabinet with billionaires. And overwhelmingly, they are white men. And so that tells you the type of people that Donald Trump feels comfortable around. Again, we have the Senior Executive Service. This is another kind of layer, and this is an opportunity for career civil servants. The SES is typically the top management rank that career civil servants can ascend to. Again, the SES was created in 1978 during the Carter administration, and it was designed to foster a cadre of long-serving, expert civil servants who exemplify high standards of professionalism. In exchange for sacrificing certain civil service protection, senior SES staffers can move into the upper reaches of the federal bureaucracy, giving presidents another pool of competent career civil servants. A lot of the people in the SES are State Department people who want to be maybe, for example, an ambassador. That's the pool that presidents pick from when they're picking dangerous parts of the country, when they're picking places in Africa, places in Latin America that may be, politically unstable. Those are you want career diplomats with long experience who are professional and who know how to interact with both the upper reaches of the State Department, but also with the CIA. People don't realize that the CIA and the State Department work hand in glove when they're outside the country. And in fact, typically the second ranking person in any diplomatic station is going to be a CIA station chief. The size of the bureaucracy, again, critics have attacked the federal bureaucracy as bloated and too large. That has tended to feed a general decline in trust among the public. There have been various attempts. Al Gore Jr. led a national performance review as part of a reinventing government initiative in the first years of the Clinton administration, and it contrasts starkly with what Donald Trump did in the opening days of his second term, with appointing Elon Musk to be head of the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk didn't know what he was doing. Elon Musk has no real understanding of American government. The people that Elon Musk put in DOGE were experts in coding and in breaking into systems and yanking out large amounts of data. They were not experts at figuring out how to make government work more efficiently. Al Gore's National Performance Review actually saved the country hundreds of billions of dollars. Elon Musk basically created a lot of lawsuits, got a lot of people fired, and hurt the United States interests abroad. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to die from diseases because of the things that he did to the foreign policy establishment, especially to USAID. Reforms over the decades have reduced the overall size of the federal government bureaucracy by 400,000, which creates a problem because, again, and we have a lot of experience at Rogers State University with this, when the state has cut appropriations for higher education, we find ourselves having to do more with less. Well, at some point, more with less creates a dilemma where you simply can't do everything you need to do. And so you have to triage things and just do the things you must do. That leads, it's hard to grow. It's hard to do your job well in those kinds of situations where you don't have the resources to do things the way they should be done. And so the reduction in the size of the federal government has resulted in increases in the size and the contracting activity at the state and local level. Again, that's already a big part of the public sector in the United States. 83% of the civil service activity is taking place at the state and local government. Local governments alone spend over $1 trillion annually. So when you look at this slide, you can see the number of employees in the federal workforce as a percentage of the national workforce from 1950 to 1922. It's gone from, again, in the 1950s and early 60s, that was kind of the high water mark. Now it's well below 2%. And again, that is telling. Another important thing that's happened is you've had a lot of increase in situations where government agencies, rather than create their own capacities, find themselves contracting to private entities. Calls for reductions in the size and scope of the federal bureaucracy, again, has led to a dramatic increase in the number of what we call federal contractors. These are privately owned and operated companies that compete for contracts with the federal government, and a significant proportion of their profits are derived from federal contracts. A really important example of that is the defense industry. Grumman and Boeing. Boeing gets a lot of their money, although they make a lot of planes for private use too. They make a lot of planes for the government as well. Grumman is also Abrams. There are a number of private companies whose main source of revenue is from government contracting, and the defense industry is one of the main contractors. The problem, of course, with privatization and when you are contracting so aggressively, it does create problems for accountability. So advocates of contracting argue that it reduces the footprint of government and increases efficiencies. Critics argue that it's really not as efficient as people claim, and that it actually ends up costing more money and at the additional cost of less oversight and accountability. So again, these are the challenges that we confront in terms of figuring out how the federal bureaucracy should be doing things. So how do we manage the bureaucracy? How does the president, Congress, and the judiciary manage the bureaucracy? The first question we should ask, is rule by experts compatible with democratic governance? There is a sense in which, bureaucratic politics can be inimical to democracy. And in fact, some of the great horrors of the 20th century have occurred because people have twisted bureaucracy to evil purposes. The Holocaust is probably the darkest example, where the Nazis basically, created a bureaucratic system for murdering people. The constitutional roots for the democratic aspect of the bureaucracy come from Article 2, Section 2, which gives presidents the appointment authority. The same passages also requires the president to require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective office. Article 2, Section 3 also grants broad executive powers for the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And I've talked about that take care clause many times. And also, again, the fact that presidents have a certain amount of administrative discretion where it comes to faithful execution of the laws. So there are two important questions that you have to ask. Do the constitutional branches of government have sufficient authority over an unelected bureaucracy? And the second, do the separated institutions sharing powers agree on how to control the bureaucracy? Part of the problem is that you have instances where laws are passed by previous administrations, and then suddenly you're expected, when Congress may change composition, how is the bureaucracy supposed to interpret a law that a previous Congress passed, where the present Congress may be deeply hostile to what that law requires? How are bureaucrats supposed to balance those obligations? This is a serious problem in our system of government, especially when the two political parties are at such loggerheads on basic matters of ideological significance. Republicans effectively have wanted for more than a half a century to undo the New Deal, to substantially unwind many of the federal responsibilities, and to return those authorities and those responsibilities to the state governments. Democrats believe that many of those responsibilities are best undertaken at the federal level. So the president is the chief executive and heads the largest set of employees in the country, and the federal government is also the largest purchaser of goods and services in the world. The management and control challenges associated with presidential management of the bureaucracy are significant. Among those challenges, the tools that presidents have, again, are the appointment power. You want to appoint people that have skills and that you can trust to manage what are oftentimes entire sectors of the economy. You also have the Office of Management and Budget, which is very effective at holding executive branch agencies to account in terms of how they spend money. One thing that has emerged again over the last 20 years or so is the creation of what are known as policy czars. For example, when you look at the Trump administration, one of the first appointments he made was to appoint a man named Tom Homan to be immigration czar, which meant that he existed independently of the Department of Homeland Security, where most of the immigration and naturalization functions for the federal government, actually reside. He wanted that additional, for him, hopefully a force multiplier to work and to act to make sure that the government is operating effectively. Presidents George Herbert Walker Bush and Obama resorted to the creation of dozens of these kinds of task forces over the course of their administration. In his first term, Donald Trump responded to the COVID-19 pandemic by creating a task force in late January of 2020. Policy czars have the advantage of being a direct report, which means they report directly to the president and don't require Senate confirmation. So how does Congress go about controlling the activities of the federal civil service? Congress can change the location or structure of agencies. They can create new agencies, or they can redistribute policy responsibilities. That's one thing that Donald Trump has claimed that he wanted to do. He wanted to basically abolish the Department of Education and relocate much of for example, the student aid kind of responsibilities to the Department of Treasury. Congress can also change the administrative structure of agencies. Congress also, importantly, has the power of oversight, which again comes in a number of forms. Police patrol, which is to say this is a routine meeting between the relevant congressional committee and agency heads, and they basically say, what's going on in your agency? How is your agent functioning? Do you need additional funds? Do you need training? Stuff like that. The other form is fire alarm oversight, and that is when bad things happen. Okay, when bad things happen, Congress gets involved and they ask tough questions. This is sort of the thing that happened with Pam Bondi, where the House Oversight Committee called Bondi in and asked her tough questions about the handling of the Epstein files, because according to some members of Congress, the Department of Justice still has not released all the relevant files. And Bondi was non-responsive and oftentimes insulting to the members of Congress, to the point where she sort of became a point of public ridicule. And one of the things we know about Donald Trump is that he does not like his people to be ridiculed. And so her performance in those congressional committee hearings, which I guarantee you, she had that burn book of where she could diss out criticisms of every Democrat asking her tough questions. The whole purpose of that was to appeal to Donald Trump. And her firing recently demonstrates something important, which is Donald Trump doesn't care. Donald Trump, you have to serve a very difficult guy to keep happy. And ultimately, Pam Bondi ran afoul of Donald Trump. Inspectors General are, again, another important aspect of government accountability at the bureaucratic level. Again, this was a Carter era reform. It's a result of the Inspector General Act. It's what we, again, would call a good government reform. Inspectors General's office exists in, I want to say there's 70-something Inspector Generals these days. 41 or so of them have civil service protection. Their job is to basically field complaints regarding their agency's actions, allegations of corruption, allegations of, of abuse of people's rights, allegations of workers' rights. Agency heads are legally barred from interfering in Inspector General investigations. This is one of the things, again, that Donald Trump had a problem with in his first term. Following his first impeachment, Donald Trump unilaterally fired several inspector generals that were at that time investigating allies. These are good government reforms. They're designed to ensure that people are behaving responsibly. And, as I'll mention in a minute, Donald Trump has fired a bunch of these folks. There are also congressional agencies that also have kind of auditing functions. The General Accounting Office is generally considered to be the nation's supreme audit institution. Again, audits are, everybody that misuses money, they fear, the dreaded audit. The job of auditors is to make sure that people are spending money in the way that they are supposed to. The money should be dispersed according to rules. Starting in Trump's second term, one of his first acts, I call it a dump day. Fridays are oftentimes characterized as dump days because on Fridays people watch a lot less news because people are going out to eat, they're doing other things, they have weekend plans. And so Friday afternoon, about 5 o'clock, is oftentimes the time when when the federal government will drop bad news. And one of President Trump's first dump days was literally January 25th, was to fire 17 executive branch inspectors general. He did this in defiance of congressional status, which mandate that presidents have to give notice and provide a compelling rationale for why they are firing an inspector general. Federal judges, and again, a number of these inspector generals have filed suit and sought to be reinstated. To this point, federal judges have found the actions unlawful, but have declined to reinstate the fired inspector generals. Trump argues that this is his government and he has the right to hire and fire whoever he wants. This is, I would argue, an extreme, manifestation of unitary executive theory. Critics contend that, again, these actions undermine government accountability. And again, I mentioned, I think in the last presentation, Pete Hegseth, as Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, has basically eviscerated the Inspector General, the Judge Advocate General's offices in the Department of Defense. This was, again, to basically deprive uniformed military commanders of legal advice regarding, executive branch orders on the use of lethal force. And he has followed up. He fired the combatant commander for the Southern Command of America, which had command over the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, right before they started blowing up private ships in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. Again, largely because Trump wanted a show of force in those areas. Hegseth was telling his uniformed officers in that area that you need to start blowing up these boats. And the combatant commander in that area said, "That's illegal, sir." And they forced him into retirement. I think the same thing probably happened recently with the firing of another four-star general. Donald Trump, up until last night, was basically threatening to obliterate Iran. He basically said he was going to blow up all the water desalination plants and all the electrical plants. He was tweeting on social media, tonight a civilization will end. That's genocide. That's not a legal order. I think there's a very real possibility that had the uniformed commanders been given that order, that they might have refused it. because it's so patently unlawful to take actions that would cause literally, likely millions of people to die. You destroy water desalination plants, you're basically depriving people of potable water, drinkable water. You would be blowing up bridges. You would be depriving people of the ability to move to a place where they could get access to water. The likelihood is that you would have seen, if he had undertaken if the military had undertaken those orders, that you would have seen more than 1 million people in Iran dying of dehydration and starvation. It's bad policy first and foremost, because you're basically, we've been making the argument for decades. Our problem is not with the people of Iran, it is with the theocratic regime that is controlling Iran and brutalizing their own people. They killed tens of thousands of their own citizens when they rose up in protest this past summer. The attacks that we've waged over the last 5 weeks have, again, probably strengthened that regime's hold over Iran. There's a very real likelihood that that regime could have collapsed under its own weight. It's not an effective regime. But instead, we attacked them, and we killed an 86-year-old man with cancer who was their supreme leader, and replaced him with a 50-something-year-old guy that's even more radical than the Ayatollah that they killed. And they've killed so many of the upper echelon people. One of the things we found in law enforcement, when you kill or arrest the heads of drug organizations, you end up getting younger and younger and more and more brutal leaders rising to the heads of those organizations. And they resort to greater levels of violence to hold on to their territory and their transshipment points. The same thing could happen in Iran. You could get the rise of a group of people that are basically going to say, that old, Ayatollah was issued a fatwa, which is a holy order, saying that they wouldn't develop a nuclear weapon. Well, that's bunk. We need a nuclear weapon. We need to be able to, blow up Israel if this sort of thing happens again. This could actually intensify the radicalism of that regime. There's reporting right now that Donald Trump decided on this attack, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, based on Israeli intelligence, not U.S. intelligence. And again, that reflects the sense in which Donald Trump is not listening. He's not a reasonable guy. He listens to his, to his ego and to his gut, if you will, and that's a pretty dangerous place pretty dangerous way to manage things. Here's a good example of kind of the struggle that exists, and again, Congress and the president have joint authority over the federal bureaucracy. And here's a good case study. There was in the early 2000s controversies around the financial sector and around how the financial sector was basically ripping people off, and how lots of businesses were ripping off consumers. There was a Harvard economist at the time named Elizabeth Warren, that wanted to basically propose the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Board. And the Obama administration decided that they were going to go ahead and do that. And so in the aftermath of the subprime mortgage, the collapse of the subprime mortgage industry and the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, you also got the creation of the Consumer Protection Act of 2010. The CFPB was the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren, but Republicans hated it. They didn't like the way it was organized. They really, and again, Republicans are reflecting the interests of those businesses and industries that were being accused of abusing consumers. And so Republicans were furious, especially over the CFPB's funding mechanism and leadership. And again, one of the ways that the Democrats made the CFPB capture resistant was to locate its funding within the Federal Reserve, which meant that Congress couldn't use the budgetary process to cut its funding when Republicans were in control of Congress. And so what has typically happened again since its creation is that whenever Republicans have had power, and it's only been Trump, they have attempted to emasculate and appoint people over the CFPB that simply won't do anything. Whereas Democrats, when they have control over it, they actually investigate allegations of fraud and penalize people and claw back, and force people to disgorge ill-gotten gains. An important aspect of bureaucratic oversight is the judiciary. The judiciary plays a significant role, and this is as a result of the Supreme Court's decision in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison, which asserted that executive branch agencies are subject to judicial review. Courts also can settle differences between Congress and executive branch agencies about the interpretation of law. Now, that is tripping up close to what are known as political questions, which the judiciary generally is eager to avoid. But judges also can monitor the implementation of laws by providing, again, the legal venue for people adversely affected by a regulation and or an adjudication. Now, again, this is something that the Trump administration's aggressive deportation actions have drawn the federal judiciary pretty consistently into a lot of these conflicts. You can remember, for example, the guy Abrego, whatever his name is. Abrego is part of his last name. He's a young man sent by his parents to the United States to avoid gangs in El Salvador when he was a teenager. He's married to an American now. He has American children. They were attempting to deport him. And they deported him back to El Salvador, which a judge had an order basically saying that he couldn't do that. But nevertheless, they did it and sent him to that CCOT prison. Eventually, he was brought back. He is now free, and again, part of the reason for that is that judges have looked at the case, looked at the government's determination, the orders to deport, and balanced that against the fact that Abrego Garcia doesn't have a criminal record. He's got an American, he's got American kids. And I think, frankly, the Trump administration wanted to make an example of him, and the courts have basically prevented that. That has happened in a number of instances. There's another case where, again, you had plane loads of deportees heading down to El Salvador, and a federal judge, Judge Boasberg, basically issued a stay, and the Department of Justice ordered the planes to take off anyway. Boasberg is trying right now, even to this day, is holding hearings to determine whether someone openly defied him and whether they are in contempt of court. So again, judges wield real authority over how laws are interpreted. Whistleblowing is an important kind of citizen-based and also internally based source of accountability. It is based on the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, which protects civil servants who report agency malfeasance to the Office of Special Counsel, which is a permanent office that, again, deals with allegations of abuse within the executive branch. Donald Trump's first impeachment was the result of a whistleblower report on a telephone call between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This actually took place I want to say the telephone call took place in December of 2019. Now, if you're not aware, whenever a president makes a call to a foreign leader, there are almost always multiple people within the U.S. government listening in on the call. That is a common protocol related to national security. One of the people on the call with Volodymyr Zelensky became very alarmed because Donald Trump, over the course of that telephone call, basically demanded and said to Zelensky, who had just been elected president, we want to help you out with your war with Russia. Remember, at this point, Russia had backed separatist movements in the Donbass region, and Ukraine had been fighting those folks for quite a long time to try and hold on to the Donbass region. This was before, of course, Russia decided to simply invade. And so, Trump said, I'd like to help you with, this military equipment that we have appropriated, but I need you to do something for me first. And he was basically threatening to withhold military assistance to Ukraine. And in exchange, what he wanted was for Volodymyr Zelensky to publicly announce a criminal investigation into Joe Biden and into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. Now, this whistleblower, listening in on the telephone call, basically determined that that was an unlawful demand, that was corrupt, that in fact what Donald Trump was attempting to do was to basically knock Joe Biden out of the running for the Democratic nomination for the 2020 election. Because even in 2019, Donald Trump believed that Joe Biden was the most significant threat to his re-election bid among the various Democrats that seemed to be aiming to get into the race. And so that gave rise, because again, in 2018, Democrats had won control of the House of Representatives. That gave rise to an impeachment inquiry that was started in the Department of, in the Judiciary Committee. And the Judiciary Committee believed that they had sufficient evidence to justify impeachment. I want to say it was three separate counts, and they voted on them, they voted them out, and they ultimately voted articles of impeachment out on Donald Trump. I was actually able to attend the first day of this first impeachment trial, which was in January of 2020, just before COVID basically began shutting down the country, in February, late February and March. And so again, much of the fight, the problem for Democrats was that Republicans controlled the Senate. And Mitch McConnell basically wanted the impeachment proceedings to be over as quickly as possible. And so effectively, McConnell shielded Trump from holding a full trial, and where, again, you would have had far more witnesses, you would have had far more evidence brought to light that would have likely put more pressure on Republicans in the Senate. Ultimately, that impeachment effort failed. And it failed, again, largely owing to partisanship, in my view. You also have, again, whistleblowing over the course of the Biden administration. There were several conservative whistleblowers in the Internal Revenue Service that accused the Biden administration of covering up Hunter Biden's various instances of tax evasion. Hunter Biden was prosecuted under the Biden administration, both on a gun charge. He had bought a gun while consuming drugs, which is against the law. But he also had engaged in tax evasion. Now, again, if Hunter Biden had not been the son of the president, there was very little likelihood that he would have been actually criminally prosecuted for tax evasion. By the time he was indicted for tax evasion, he had largely paid most of his back taxes back. Now, he had done that by selling some pretty sketchy art for very large sums of money to somebody who was a close supporter of the president. I regret to say that this is how things are done, within both political parties. Nevertheless, that is sort of the way things are. But again, there were lots and lots of those kinds of complaints, arguing that the administration placed pressure on the upper reaches of the IRS to go light on Joe Biden. You also have citizen oversight, and oftentimes citizen oversight takes the form of interest group oversight. In 1966, Congress passed something known as the Freedom of Information Act, which gives journalists and ordinary citizens the right to request records from any federal agency. There are certain records that may be held back. Personnel records, health records of personnel, those are examples of things that are typically not going to be allowed to be revealed. In 2017, reporters' FOIA request led to revelations that the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, had attempted to suppress a series of accidents within its labs that had resulted in the release of dangerous pathogens. This was a major scandal that actually compelled the CDC to significantly reform and tighten its lab procedures. And again, this is the sort of thing that's, public revelations actually are gonna be very important for achieving these kinds of reforms. With all these mechanisms of accountability, the problem is that, again, you have administrative discretion. You need a certain amount of administrative discretion in order to get things, done. The smooth operation of the federal government requires civil servants who are experts and who are committed to the impartial, uniform implementation of laws and regulations. You can't have effective and efficient policy implementation without people that know what to do. At times, however, bureaucrats may implement laws based on their own motivations and goals rather than those of the president. The 2014 failures of the Veterans Health Administration was an example of these these kinds of bureaucratic failures. And again, these kind of failures have, failure is an orphan, if you will. Success has many fathers. In this instance, this was a problem that could have been foreseen, and that there simply Congress didn't appropriate sufficient resources for scaling up the veterans' health care system. Bureaucratic agencies can also be subject to regulatory capture. This is something that happened with the Federal Aviation Commission. They're basically responsible for airplane safety. In the early 2000s, or in the mid-2000s, you had Boeing that tried to rush out the 737 Supermax. They were dealing with competition from Eurobus, which is, they created a much more efficient plane. Boeing tried to keep the 737 airframe and just strap more powerful and fuel-efficient engines on them. Anyone can tell you that aerodynamically, a more powerful engine is going to affect the aerodynamics of the plane. They tried to counter that with computers, with basically automatic computer systems that would affect and track the avionics. That was a poor response. They should have simply re-engineered the plane. If they had been adequately regulated, they would have been compelled to re-engineer the plane to do a much more thorough job. Instead, because the Federal Aviation Commission had been captured basically by the aviation industry, by the the airline industry, they didn't, and ultimately Boeing got that plane into service, got them into into production, and you had several terrible plane crashes that occurred in Indonesia and in Africa. I can't remember which country it was in, Kenya, I think, where entire flights, hundreds of people, were killed because Boeing didn't provide sufficient guidance to pilots in terms of how to manage the autopilot. Dealing with all these avionics. And the planes ended up going into power crashes, and the pilots didn't know how to deal with that. That's an example of what regulatory capture can do, where you can have terrible, death tolls because the federal bureaucracy is not doing their job in the way that they're supposed to, because they're more intent on serving the interests of the airline industry. And keep in mind, again, in order to be a federal regulator for the FAA or whatever they are, the FAA, Federal Aeronautics Administration. You need to be an airline, an aerodynamic engineer. Well, those folks, and increasingly you need to know about computer programming. Those folks are going into the industry. The regulators don't have sufficient incentives to attract people to become regulators in that industry. And so they're outgunned, frankly, by the people that are making the planes. Increasingly, we're seeing a return to the spoils system. As a candidate, Donald Trump promised to revive his attempt to reclassify tens of thousands of career civil servants as appointees without civil service protection. His running mate, J.D. Vance, advocated firing every mid-level bureaucrat and replacing them with Trump loyalists. Trump's demands of congressional Republicans to go into recess following inauguration, he wanted to do that so that he could basically rely on extensive recess appointments just to do crazy amounts of stuff in a short period of time. Trump has purged large numbers of military officers, again, in some instances because they were women, because they were people of color. And this gives rise to a question. Was there groupthink in this decision to attack Iran? Recent reporting in the New York Times suggests that Trump made the decision as a result of a series of meetings in the Situation Room, which is a room in one of the sub-basements of the White House. He had a proposal from Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu and certain Israeli intelligence agencies, especially Mossad, believed that they could achieve regime change in Iran with a series of targeted strikes, that through air power alone, they could destroy the Iranian regime and facilitate regime change. A number of people within the administration basically said, well, we can take out their missile facilities just like we did their nuclear facilities. We can severely attrit how they make these ballistic missiles that we're worried about and that Israel is obviously worried about. The idea that we can do this, that we can achieve regime change, that the regime itself will simply collapse as a result of air power, seems far-fetched. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a guy named General Kane, basically said to Trump, this is standard operating procedure for Israel. They oftentimes come to us with very optimistic plans that are oftentimes not particularly well thought out. Trump basically ignored a lot of the advice and a lot of the people in the room because he wanted to do it. And he basically put his thumb on the scale fairly early in the process when he said to Benjamin Netanyahu, let's take out, Ayatollah. It sounds good to me. The U.S. intelligence community's assessment of the Israeli case for regime change was that it was farcical. Donald Trump ignored that advice. He also ignored several military people, and he also ignored the vice president because J.D. Vance said, we don't know what's going to happen when Iran is fighting for its life. We don't know whether that regime is just going to collapse or whether it's going to do crazy amounts of stuff. And when the prospects of the idea that one of the first things that Iran might do is close the Straits of Hormuz, Donald Trump said, they're not going to do that. He just dismissed that out of hand. This will be over too fast. And the problem here is that Donald Trump seemed to think that Iran would be just like Venezuela, and that there was an Iranian analog to Delcy Rodriguez, who is the person that he is basically designated as, his agent in Venezuela, that we could somehow do that, knock out a few Iranian leaders, and then someone would come to him and basically throw themselves at his feet and say, if you'll just stop killing us, I'll do whatever you want. That's simply not the way the Iranian regime works. And I actually think that Iran's regime was closing in on its last legs. This actually strengthens the hand of the regime. It makes it more likely that they will hold on for several more years. And again, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Donald Trump just didn't listen. He didn't hear what he didn't want to hear. He heard pie in the sky, forecasts from Benjamin Netanyahu, and he ignored, the intelligence of it, that was provided to him by his own intelligence services. And there was not one person in that room that had any knowledge, any in-country knowledge of Iran itself. No one in that room, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had any understanding of Iranian culture or of how that regime operates. And the result is, well, next time you go get gas, check a receipt from 5 weeks ago, and then check the receipt that you get this time. That's the result. So bureaucracy, what do you think? What do we think about how the federal bureaucracy operates, the fact that we need bureaucracy, but at the same time, bureaucracy can be somewhat of a threat to democracy? Here's some questions to think about. Some argue that Americans' liberties are threatened by too large an administrative state, while others contend that a bureaucracy with too few resources is the real threat. Based on what you've learned, based on what you're seeing in the world right now, what do you think? Are there ways in which you have benefited personally from bureaucratic action or been harmed by it? What types of bureaucratic activity are the most noticeable to you that you've learned about, that you learned more about the role of the bureaucracy in American government? Finally, what types of reforms would make bureaucracy more accountable to the public? It's important to keep in mind a great deal of bureaucratic activity takes place at the state and local level. Even as we're talking about, this is tax season right now. I'm shooting this in April. People's taxes are due in about a week. You're also getting your state assessments of your home if you have a home. You're getting your local county government is going to tell you how much your home is worth and how much your property taxes are going to be worth. There are so many different ways that the government, and it's not the government. It's a series of very different, oftentimes independently operating governments operate. We need bureaucracy in order to do things effectively. We're having arguments right now at Rogers State University about how we should manage change going forward. We're trying to expand enrollment. If we're going to do that, we have to have the administrative capacity to ensure that students have the programs and the resources that they want. Our two schools, right now we have the college, or two college. We have the College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Professional Studies. We may need to have 3 schools, because that might be a better way of managing the happy event that we expand, the event that we have more students, more people, greater demand for different degrees, more master's degrees. We may have to have a college of graduate studies. We may have to have at some point a college of education. You have to be able to administer these things. And again, that's how do you get a college degree? It involves people knowing what courses you're taking over a period of time, tracking your progress, making sure that you're progressing at the proper rate. That is essentially a bureaucratic function. Think about it in those terms. Bureaucracy means paying attention, paying attention to the details, and making sure that those details are properly carried out. So that's it for this presentation, for our discussion of bureaucracy. When we come back next week, we will deal with another very important, the third constitutional branch of our government, which is the judiciary. The federal judiciary was described by Alexander Hamilton as the least dangerous branch of government, largely owing to the fact that it was, for the most part, passive in nature. Its job was simply to interpret the Constitution. However, as the size and the scope of federal government has significantly expanded, the role of the federal government in determining the scope of federal powers has given it a significantly greater amount of influence. So we'll begin dealing with those issues next lecture. I'll see you next time.